Yes, you've been ready for ages. Okay, I'll announce you and I'll click on record in just one moment. So on the count of 3, we'll begin. And admins, if you could please record the meeting. So on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Welcome everybody. EA Zoom Meetings presents evolutionary astrologer, past life regression therapist, and author of Understanding Karmic Complexes, Patricia L. Walsh, to answer your questions on karma and reincarnation. Welcome, Patricia. Please go ahead. Hi, go ahead, thanks.
Okay. So I do have some things that I can talk at you about. But let's just, before I go to that, let's just see how questions go and what some people might have on their minds, if we want to start there.
Okay, does anyone have a question? You can unmute yourself and speak. Okay, not yet, Patricia.
All right, so then let me figure out how to get my my screen share going.
Does Danny have a question?
Yep, that's really good.
Okay. So, you know, I've been working in regression therapy for almost 20 years and evolutionary astrology for 10, maybe more. Yeah, actually more. And in all of that is what some of the material is what I put in my book that I wrote about on combining evolutionary astrology and regression therapy. So this is just, I've shared this before, maybe some of you have seen it, but I like to try to break down specifically, you know, from the EA paradigm, what we're looking for in the chart when we look at somebody's karmic complexes. You know, as you know, EA likes to start with the basic paradigm of Pluto and the nodes. And it's kind of said that, you know, as evolutionary astrologers, you could actually care about anything less else but Pluto and the nodes. So let's understand how complexes form first. There's a quote from Jung that goes, "A complex is formed where we experience a defeat in life." And what Jung was talking about is that when the psyche's natural ability to desire, as we would say in evolutionary astrology, go after something that you want, complete a desire, make an action, do something, and you become either thwarted or blocked or stopped, that is the moment of the formation of a complex. And in past lives, when this has happened, these complexes don't go away in between lives. And in fact, it's the complex that continues to kind of have this life because it's the unfinished impulses that the psyche was unable to complete. In Vedanta, they call these samskaras. They call these like a wound to the soul. And that's something that evolutionary astrologers are used to that term, wound to the soul. When we look at Pluto, we're looking at a deep security emotional wound. When we look at the South Node, we're looking at perhaps a repetitive pattern. This is also something, just bringing modern psychology and the understanding of trauma theory into it. This is also something that Freud recognized when he was doing his kind of deep work on understanding the impulses of the subconscious. You know, coincidentally, that was going on in the 1930s, both Jung and Freud, when Pluto was discovered. Surprise, depth psychology. So Freud had noticed the repetitive nature of trauma. What he noticed was that when somebody is traumatized, it's like the record gets stuck. They're stuck in this pattern that because the psyche experiences this wound and is unable to reconcile it. And this is very similar to what they describe in Vedanta as a samskara. It's like the record gets stuck on this repetitive pattern within your soul. So when you think about karma, you know, there's a misnomer in the Western world because if you take it from the pure Vedantic and you bring it into the Western world, you're going to unnecessarily get, although it's unnecessary, this kind of Judeo-Christian overlay that, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, this kind of Abrahamic law stuff, that even if you're Christian or not, it still permeates Western civilization. So that kind of gets carried forward into our understanding of karma. And lots of times there's a few common phrases that people say when they're trying to describe karma or what they think karma actually is, that, it's a kind of payback for something that you did in the past, or it's a lesson that you need to learn. Okay. In my experience, I would say that if I'm going to give it a percentage, I would say 85% of the karma that you enact or are subject to or are conditioned by is simple, numb repetition. And if you think about just in your current life, day to day, how original are your thoughts every day? How original are your actions every day? How deeply are you conditioned, to repetition just by the nature of life? When we add in the understanding of how we know that trauma affects the soul and causes some kind of fragmentation or some kind of deep furrowing wound like this psychic scar tissue, and that the soul then is kind of doomed to that repetition until, as Jung was saying, that action can be completed. And when it happened in a past life, you were unable to complete the action. You carry forward these wounds in the current life to be able to complete them. The completion of those actions is not always so simple. If we break out some skaras, and I've made this correlation before, that there's two elements of in Vedanta. One is called the klesha, and the other is a vasana. So a klesha is described as a negative, emotionally laden thought. And in our work in regression therapy, we recognize these in people's everyday language when we make these kinds of statements that are these definitive statements that describe patterns in our life that are exactly what we're living in our lives. So these kind of pervasive, repetitive things that if you were to start to give the words, I always say you can just finish the sentence, I always or I never, to start to understand what some of your patterns are. So the idea is, this is an example of some of them, like, just a pervasive feeling of like, I'm not good enough, which will be repeated in the lifetime. Again, what Freud was talking about, the repetition compulsion of trauma, carries through the many lives of the soul. So this idea of, I'm not good enough, it's all my fault, I always have to do it alone, there's never enough, I can't show how I feel. These kinds of things are oftentimes re-imprinted in the current life because the trauma carries forward. It's a longer discussion. It starts in the womb. But to give it an astrological overlay, I often notice that pretty much up until the first Saturn return, there's an either in literal or in metaphoric, there's a repetition of karma, a repetition of the imprints. So sometimes the repetition is a literal replay, and sometimes the repetition is more like a kind of metaphoric energy, but it carries the same kind of energy, which then causes often exacerbated feelings about the event. Like, common one is fear of public speaking. People can be born with that. And, maybe there's a few instances in their current life, like, they were called out in front of the classroom and felt ashamed, but their response to that is often greater than the current circumstance calls for, which in our work, which is called deep memory process, the kind of regression that I do, implies that there's a deeper memory there. And all of those things resonate and cluster around these negative, emotionally laden thoughts that are, in essence, you can say they're the content of the South Node. So when you're looking at the South Node in the chart, you can look at these there's kinds of these phrases in there. And if you learn how the archetypes act in past lives, you can kind of see them. In fact, I have a chart I'm going to show you, tell you a story, and then we can start to open questions. Let me just finish this thought on Vasana, and then I'll pause for some questions. So Vasana is described in Vedanta as the trace of perfume left behind on a cloth. So what they're saying is that it's not really the actual perfume, but it's the scent of the perfume. And if you can imagine how pervasive that is. So when we think of that, that's kind of like Pluto. Pluto is this bottom line that permeates everything. It's the original thing is not really still there when we're talking about karmic complexes or past lives, but the scent of it is still there. And that scent permeates everything. So to a certain degree, we can call these memory traces, but they're so deeply ingrained. As we say in evolutionary astrology, this is a bottom line psychology. So this correlates very much to Pluto. So vasanas, they describe as tendencies to act according to certain patterns. I also relate them to, as an example, to think of like character types, like you're born and you're an introvert, right? Or you're born and you're an extrovert. When we think of evolution and how easy or hard it is to actually evolve, when we look at the chart, we know we're looking at Pluto's polarity point to look at a point of evolution for these deeply ingrained emotional soul patterns. It's kind of like turning from an introvert to an extrovert in one lifetime. I mean, we do change certain functions of our personality, but to change your bottom line psychology that much in one lifetime is an analogy of what it's like to have to bring to resolution and to complete these deep standing, this kind of bottom line psychology. So let me just pause there and see if anybody has any questions so far.
Patricia, we do have a few questions. Do they need to be about this particular slide, or can they be just general questions at this stage?
Well, I guess we can start with just whatever you've got.
Okay, fantastic. So we have a question from Wei. Wei, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes. Hi, Patricia. I'm interested in your regression work. After you guiding people through their past life stories, help them understanding their karmic pattern. Do you also use EA paradigm, the astrology chart, to help them developing their Pluto polarity point or North Node lessons?
Yeah, I actually have a chart example which illustrates that, but my book also illustrates that. It's a dynamic that's inherent within the healing of a complex. When you actually heal and work through all of these thwarted, blocked, suppressed, repressed, dissociated, fragmented parts of the soul, it's like a rubber band. The North Node and South Node and Pluto and the polarity point are like a rubber band. The tension is there. When you release the tension of the South Node or Pluto, when you heal those complexes, it literally slingshots the energy to the polarity point or to the North Node. I've seen it, and it's in every case in my book where you see it's a natural occurrence of having healed a complex, because as we know, certainly in evolutionary astrology, a bottom line principle is that everybody, if conscious or unconscious, is undergoing a process of evolution. So it's a natural impulse. And when you release that which was blocking evolution, the psyche will naturally go there.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Great, thanks, Patricia. We also have a question from Wanda. Wanda, please go ahead.
Hi, Patricia. I was just wondering, especially even in reference to this particular slide, and you may be addressing this soon, when I see memory traces, my first thought went to Uranus and also retrogrades. So how do they play into, where do you look at those as far as looking at the karmic complexes?
I look at, okay, so retrogrades are something different in evolutionary astrology. Retrogrades carry a connotation perhaps of some past life resonance for the reason why one has retrograde. So a retrograde is an individuating archetype. It's where you have to kind of do that planet in your own way in this lifetime. The reason why might be because you've overdone that in the past, or you haven't done it enough. So there might be a complex around whatever that particular planet is, like, you know, for example, Mercury, a natal Mercury retrograde can carry the connotation that somebody has just done Mercury too much. They've taken in so much, they've internalized so much information that in this lifetime, they need to kind of necessarily rebel against taking in too much more. It's like they have to distill it now in this lifetime and then find their own way. What is my own knowledge? What is my own interest? Develop a particular interest because maybe they've been scattered. So to a certain degree, you can see a karmic element in there. Uranus as an archetype, what I'm talking about now is the basic karmic axis, Pluto and the nodes. For me, when I look at a chart, that's all I really need to look at. If Uranus is involved in that natal configuration, and that karmic axis, then it becomes an archetype of importance, if that answers your question, which then will imply a further level of fragmentation, a further level of trauma, a further level of the kind of fragmentation and dissociation that happens to the soul, but it also carries other levels of meaning. That archetype itself can carry alienation, being cast out, all kinds of things. I have an Aquarius South Node in the 11th house, so I'm familiar with that archetype on a karmic level. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay.
So Patricia, would you like one more question or would you like to move ahead? Okay, great. Sarah, please go ahead.
Hi, Patricia. My question is about nodes in the modes. In your article that you had written for the Evolutionary Astrology Journal, you spoke of a few cases. In one of those cases, the lady, I think, had the nodes in the cardinal signs, and you'd noted something about them being manifesting this life or something to that nature. Can you help us better understand that and what the modes of the nodes are like in cardinal and what they may look like in fixed or mutable?
Well, the nodes in cardinal have a specific meaning in evolutionary astrology. And probably that's why I'm trying to remember her chart. In fact, I was recently looking at that case because I'm going to use it in Norway, which I'm leaving for in a couple of days. So I try to remember her nodal axis. I thought she's got an Aries, she had an Aries South Node in the 3rd house that I remember. Maybe it was cusp 3rd, 4th. Anyway, in evolutionary astrology, the cardinal signs and houses, and also Pluto being in a cardinal sign or house, would imply that there's a new evolutionary cycle starting. And really, that's just what it means, that there's some kind of urge for the soul to start, or it has already started some new evolutionary cycle. There are not specific rules about fixed or mutable in that regard.
Thank you. That makes it clear.
Okay.
So Patricia, would you like one more question?
Okay, we've got them coming in. And then I do have a chart that I'm going to walk you through a past life, which might also stir some questions, just to give you an idea of how it plays out in somebody's lifetime.
Great, that'll be great. I have my own question for you.
Okay.
In terms of negative laden thoughts, of right and wrong, good and evil. This seems to be wired into the human experience in terms of conscience. But how does that relate to the age of Pisces and the sub-age of Virgo? And are these negative laden thoughts still going to continue into the age of Aquarius?
I assume we'll probably come up with some new ones. I mean, you know, we evolve the archetypes as we kind of, I mean, archetypes live through us, but we also have our life through them. I mean, it's an equal kind of thing, but archetypes are born of human experience, right? So, you know, this Piscean age with the whole Judeo-Christian thing and and some of the, in fact, I've kind of had my head deep in some mythology and alchemy today as I was also preparing for NORWAC. So I was looking at some of the alternative creation stories, which you can also see that not all of them, that the non-Christianized ones don't often have that, that good and evil thing. They see polarity, but they see it more like yin and yang, right? That it's a necessary experience. So there's, you know, duality, it's not the ultimate reality, and there's something more beyond it. But while we're here, we do this dance of, you know, light and dark and good and bad and so on and so forth. So it's a very pervasive thing, as you mentioned, in the Piscean age, again, through the Judeo-Christian mythology, but it's not universal. It's not in all Aboriginal myth, Native American myth. You know, that idea of good and bad is not, because, you know, to a certain degree, some of those cultures had a natural, you know, as you know, in evolutionary astrology, we would say they had a kind of natural law, morality that was the guiding principle that everybody was tuned into. When you start overlaying, you know, these man-made beliefs, and I really do mean man-made beliefs, then we get these artificial structures. So what would that look like in the Aquarian age? Like I said, we'll probably come up with our own polarities because duality is a part of life here. I don't really know what they would look like, though.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let me walk you through a story here. I'm going to have to read my notes. I actually have a transcript of this session, but just to start with, so this is an interesting chart. In fact, I have boxes and boxes of cases, and just before I came on, I said, oh, I should pull out a case just to have it. And I just pulled this one out randomly. It's actually somebody I worked with several years ago. But what I liked about it is the Leo resonance, because we have a transiting, the nodes just changed last week, a little bit week before, into Leo Aquarius, Leo North Node, transiting Leo North Node. So I kind of like this story for some of its Leo themes. But as we kind of look at this chart, you can start to see here that all of these planets in Leo are squaring the nodes. And as you know, in evolutionary astrology, Pluto squaring the nodes implies a certain kind of, real difficulty with getting on beyond whatever the particular complex is. So in short, we have, we have Pluto, Saturn, and Mars square the nodes here in Leo from the 12th house. And the nodes here, as you can see, Scorpio, Taurus. So just basic, right? Just starting there, that already tells us a lot. Like we might start to assume now, if you're starting to do an interpretation with somebody, as we always say in evolutionary astrology, you want to kind of listen to what their concerns are. This, seriously, you could just take an inventory of somebody's childhood in bullet point and then get the whole idea of the karma that they're bringing in, because you'll see it re-imprinted from those experiences. But this woman came to me, and her specific issues were that she wanted more freedom in her expression of creativity. She felt blocked and thwarted. She works with women in helping them manifest their potential, running kind of these creative potential groups. And she felt like she had kind of hit a wall with something. So something was being triggered in her. Interestingly enough, when I worked with her, she was in a reverse nodal return exact. So that was when the nodes were transiting back here, and the south node was in Taurus and the north node was in Scorpio. So it was actually exactly at that moment. So I focused on, you know, I don't have to get into the dynamics of exactly how I got her in the past life. That's, you know, what I do. But she talked about, these are her words, coming out, being more in her work, like she was doing what she loved to do, but a part of her didn't feel present. Now, just start looking at the chart here already. 12th house is often associated with dissociation, and as we know, Leo is an archetype of living one's heart, really being in one's passion, really being in one's creativity. So she was saying she felt passionate about these things, but blocked from some level of it, like a certain part of her was kind of going through the motions. She wanted to be more deeply engaged in what she was doing. So in brief, we started the story, and she was a little girl who's on her knees and she's praying fervently to God. So now here comes the 12th house archetype, right? So she's all in this energy of devotion, and these are some of her words. She said, I like being with God. God's going to take care of me. God is beautiful white light. I feel loved. I feel his presence. I feel his power. And at this point, she feels that life is pretty good. So when I ask her something about how she's aware of this energy, because she's a young girl at this point in the story, she starts talking about the nuns and how the nuns come to her house and they're all really nice, and you know, she's quite attached to them, so on and so forth. So then I'm trying to remember how I got this out of her. Something about, she says, when the nuns are here, life is good at home. And then when they're not there, bad things happen. Okay, so now we know that there's something going on. So I bring her back to these moments of when things are bad at home. And father comes home drunk, beats mother. She's a little girl hiding upstairs somewhere behind something, and father comes up and drags her out and takes off her clothes and abuses her. Now, sexual abuse, etc., we can see already in the Scorpio-Taurus axis, but also Pluto and Mars are often indicators of that kind of trauma. So she kind of has it as, you know, I always say that the Scorpio-Taurus axis often carries a kind of usury karma. It's being used or using others. You know, if you can't get your needs want, you then become manipulative, or you then have to become manipulative. So this is an experience of a young girl being abused by her father. And somebody's unmuted and typing. So I'm just bringing, I can hear that. And breathing heavy. Okay, so interestingly, with this Mars square the nodes, and it's really kind of exact here, she's quite a spunky thing in her past life. She doesn't shut down. She fights him, and she tries to tell him it's wrong, and I don't want this, and so on and so forth. But little by little, as the story goes on, and you can look at this symbolism of kind of Saturn overtaking Mars in the 12th house, that, you know, abuse and she starts to repress parts of herself. She starts to kind of, you know, numb and deaden, which is also part of the Taurus archetype. So she starts to internalize all the ick and the shame, which can be part of Scorpio archetype, because Scorpio, as well as Virgo, internalizes, you know, rules the digestive system. So there can be I find quite frequently with Scorpio South Node, or that archetype that the person has been made to feel bad in some way, and they've internalized this sense of evil. So she decides, she doesn't tell anybody, she keeps her secret. It's in the third house, right? She doesn't speak out at this moment. She doesn't tell anybody, except that she does say to the nuns that things aren't nice at home and that she wants to become one of them. And the nuns, of course, invite her to do so. So she joins as, I think they call it a novitiate. You know, she's still too young to become a full nun. So she goes into training, and actually everything's pretty good there at the nunnery. She finds, she never really thinks back about home or this or that. She loves praying. She's in all of her devotion, et cetera, et cetera. And then, hold on, so look at my notes. And then, she goes to get her first vows. So now she's 18 and she's going to become a nun. And there's some ritual involved in that where she receives her habit and then they shave her head. And as that's going on, she's like, oh, this habit is so tight. I don't like it. It's constricting. I like my body to feel free, Taurus ruling physical body and the sensate nature. And so she kind of struggles with it, but then, you know, realizes that this is part of what has to happen. But then part of her starts to shut down. She says, I feel, her own words, I feel like I'm losing myself. Again, 12th house. I feel like I'm losing myself. Like I'm disappearing inside. Okay, this is a form of dissociation. So she's not the kind of person who dissociated out there. She's the kind of person who dissociated in. A part of her kind of goes into hiding at this moment. And then she starts to realize, and this is where some of this third house comes in, she starts to realize that she's kind of been lying to herself, that maybe she's not all that devoted to being a nun, and she really, for the first time, has the realization that the reason why she's in the nunnery is because she's running from her dad and that abuse. And that kind of also hits her like a wall of bricks. And so this is also part of what causes her resignation. So she starts to kind of resign, but she tries to make the best of it. In one scene, we move forward, and she doesn't like the restriction. She keeps, I mean, it's interesting how this Mars keeps popping up in her story. She sneaks outside because there's a full moon, and she takes off the habit and starts dancing in the full moon. Now, I remember this when I was working with her. I saw echoes of another lifetime there behind that, like possibly an echo when she was a priestess or something, you know, and that would be here, right? Think of Taurus in the 9th house, and how if one is really in their sensate physical body, how attuned to nature, and that would be someone's religion, right? So it's like this deeper memory is coming through her in her past life of some other lifetime. So she's trying to enact this as this nun, and they find her and they drag her inside, and she's a little bit, you know, angry about that, and they put her in solitary confinement, like in her cell, and she's supposed to pray and do all of this. And she really, in the Mars, right, it's this Mars confronting Saturn, right, all this restriction and repression, and Mars is trying, it's still trying to express itself. This is her will. So finally, she kind of, after several days in isolation, she collapses and decides that she's kind of lays down, wilting, exhausted. This is, again, this 12th house effect on Mars, right? We have a really strong will, yet the erosive quality of the 12th house is starting to wear away at her will. Now, this level, another Mars level comes out. She's angry. She's kind of angry at God. And now she just kind of is deciding that she's just going to play the game. But she's still really angry inside. So basically, time goes on, And she ends up, there's this priest that seduces her, and she ends up sleeping with the priest. I mean, it's Scorpio Taurus, you know, sex had to be involved at some point again, right? Because she's still unresolved with all of the wounding from her childhood, from the sexual abuse from her childhood. So again, repetition compulsion, it's going to play out again. So she ends up, oh wait, hold on a second. Let me just see if I jumped ahead. Oh wait, actually, I'm sorry, I'm a little out of line. She ended up leaving the nunnery. And then she snuck away to go live with these priests and kind of acting as like a little helper to them, cleaning and cooking. And she feels like she escaped the restriction of the nunnery. Yet this is when some priest starts to seduce her. She kind of likes it because she said, it's not like my father at all. You know, they have this little shared secret. Again, she feels special, right? There's the specialness of Mars and Leo. There's a whole bunch that I can talk about, how incest and abuse also can carry that resonance of, you know, telling somebody, oh, you're so special, you're my little so-and-so, these are our secrets, and that can lead to somebody's sense of identity, but it's a kind of false identity. So she falls into some of this romance with this priest and so on and so forth. And then a little Scorpio kicks in. She starts to realize that there's other girls that they're sleeping with too, and she gets insanely jealous. Like she thought I was the only one. I thought I had this special thing. And now she starts to, again, get kind of enraged and realizing, again, the usury nature of this Scorpio-Taurus axis, where she's really mad about being used, and realizes she's kind of just like a prostitute and a servant now. Then she starts to get angry with the whole Jesus thing. And so she's like that. She's listening to the priest and then preaching, and now you can feel the disillusionment of the 12th house coming in. You know, what she had previously believed, now she sees it's all a big lie, 3rd house. You know, she is essentially seeking for truth here within this kind of twisted system that she's in. So she then, I'm trying to remember how it happened, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. Time goes on, she's disillusioned, yet she says that something starts to come through her and she starts to express it in painting. And she said, I remember that she said, it's like a Holy Spirit thing. Like some energy just comes through me and there's things that I can express in this painting that I just didn't know I had in me. It's like they move through me. And then she loves all the colors. So we see a kind of Leo energy really coming through here. She loves the color. She stops being with the priest. She wants to spend all of her time. She gets kind of obsessive about painting. But then the people in the church or wherever she's associated with, they show some of the paintings and they really like them. So then she starts to kind of get known for her painting, and she's kind of happy with that. She starts to feel a kind of, as she's grown older now, she starts to feel a sense of some sense of fulfillment, and then she starts writing, 3rd house. Right? She had been journaling before about her anger at the church and Jesus and so on. So now this energy that's coming through is pouring into writing. And, you know, you can just look at the signature here, Scorpio, you would think maybe that wasn't such a good thing, right? Or maybe it's, you know, in past lives, it usually doesn't turn out so good. It's Scorpios involved. So she's writing and sharing that with some people, and one day some man knocks on her door and threatens her and says, are you the one that wrote this? And she's like, yes, I did. And she literally says to him, you don't threaten me, it's my truth, etc. You know, now we see some of the 9th house, and Jupiter also does conjunct back here, wide, but there. And so the next moment we move forward, and she continued working at her stuff, but some men snuck in her house at night, and she wakes up to find these men in her bedroom, and they stab her in the heart, and she dies stabbed in the heart, right? I mean, there's so many things in her story that are so literal. Mars and Leo, as you know, rules the physical heart. So she dies, feeling very sad. She's angry at the ignorant people that killed her. She, I have her look down at her body, collect her thoughts and feelings. She has a sense of pride about herself, though, and she's a little bit happy that she kind of still tried to live her truth despite so much repression. So I'm guiding her to kind of find some resources there in the afterlife. And in our work, in deep memory process, this is where we start to finish the unfinished impulses. This is where we can resolve the traumas that the past life self wasn't able to by reliving it and then working with these parts of the soul that are still stuck in the complexes. So we work with, energies in the afterlife that can be helpers or whatever. So I asked for some helping being to come, and she sees this feminine form that's very much like an angelic figure. That she starts to feel this sense of pure love, and this being, converses with her, lets her know that she's loved, etc. So with the help of this being, I ask her to pull the knife out of her heart. And because we can carry these things from past lives, wounds that have happened, they're like literally still in our etheric body. So she pulls out this, and then she starts to sob, and there was so much pain and so much betrayal and so much, it all started to come out. So I asked this feminine angel, angelic healing being, to start to help her and to find out what is the crying that's going on there. And she gets in touch with her own little girl self from that past life. And I wrote this in my book. Quite frequently when the fourth house Cancer is involved or Leo is involved, there's a real need to work with the wounds from past life childhoods. And as you could see already from her story, imagining her as this young girl, this is now where she's starting to get in touch with some of the pain that she actually carried from that she refused to or didn't allow herself to feel during that lifetime. So she tunes into this little girl inside, and she says she's gray, and it's like she's kind of hiding and she doesn't want to come out. So I let this feminine spirit help her work with her, and little by little that little girl part starts to kind of come out of her heart, and she was frozen and she's getting unfrozen and so on and so forth. So it's a bit of a process, and finally this child emerges and feels revivified and seen, right? 12th house, seen. She finally gets to be seen. And honored. And then so now she starts to come into color, and she starts to realize she's such a happy little girl, and she's full of third house curiosity and passion, right? Think of all that, the Mars and Scorpio and all of that. She's got a lot of emotion. And I asked her, is there space for her in your heart? Can she stay there with you? And she's like, it's not quite healed yet. So I know that this little girl needs to confront the father spirit from that lifetime. So I asked for some other help to come, and I asked for a spirit animal, which we use frequently in our work. And a bear comes to be with her. And bear is giving her strength to confront this father, which she felt powerless against, even though she did try to fight him when she was little. So she's there with Bear, and Father shows up kind of all small and disheveled, and he's not the looming power that he was as in her lifetime. As a spirit, he's quite, he was an alcoholic, right? So he's quite disheveled, and she feels sorry for him, but now, we need to get him and all of the ick that he put into her, all of this internalized badness and shame, which is what happens in abuse, sexual intrusion. We need to get that out. So Bear works with her, an angelic being works with her, and she kind of kicks his energy out. And even though she has pity on him, and Mercy, she needs to get his energy out. So she tells him, you know, what you did was wrong. And she gets to express a healthy sense of anger, which is a restoration of this energy, the healthy sense of boundary, right? Saturn and Mars, the sense of a healthy boundary and reclaiming of her own body that was misused. So anyway, this ends up being a big deal, and we go through fast forward. We call in some further healers to help some healing spirit women come in, and they take her to a waterfall in the spirit world, and they wash her in this golden light. So a lot of the things that she internalized and carried that didn't belong to her start to wash away. And then she starts to get this memory. It's interesting. It's this lifetime that I saw during the life. She starts to get her own kind of past life memory from a past life in the spirit world, where she's in a temple. And she's very sensual, and she's doing some kind of belly dancing or something. And she says, I'm in Saturn, and I'm connected with a community of women, and I'm honored, and I'm loved, and I'm recognized that these are all things Leo wants and needs. And she said that there's springs and there's waters, and I'm asking them, what do you do? And she said, we go into ecstatic trance to connect, and there's this undulation and this rhythm, and she starts doing that in her body as I'm working with her. This is a bit of a restoration of the healthy level of Scorpio Taurus that needs to come through. So I asked her, what is your service? What is it that you do in that life? And she said, it's a connection. I offer the connection to the rhythm of life. It's like a Kundalini movement. And so I ask her, because I really want to her to be able to identify with this energy. I said, if you had a name in that life, what would it be? What's your gift? And she said, the one who reveals ecstasy. Now we're starting to get to an empowered level of this axis, right? When you remember how degraded this had become in that lifetime. Now she's connecting back with her truth. This is her truth here, her essential truth. So now, being in this energy, I asked her to bring this energy back to the nun's life. And so I reminded her of when she wanted to take her clothes off and dance under the full moon, so on. And I am affirming for her that this is the deeper memory of who you are, who you truly are, right? This is the authentic self she's looking to get back to. So she said, yes, some of that came through in my painting and my writing, and she starts to realize how much of it she didn't really get to express, and how much she wants to bring that forward into this life, into her current life. And then, so just to make sure that we really clean things out, I have her re-meet the nuns so that she can show them this is who I really am. And she decides she wants to try to convert the nuns to her religion, right? Which is this natural being your body. So all the spirits of the nuns are there, and they're kind of a little bit hesitant about, right? And little by little, they start to give in. So she's kind of restoring them also to their natural feminine. So that happens, that goes on for a while. She re-meets the ones that, killed her. She sees that, they were acting out of ignorance and their own misguided beliefs, etc. And then we worked further with bringing this sensual energy into her current life. And now, in this point of the session, I'm working with her in integrating this into her current life. And she starts to feel that energy and how it will infuse all of her creative projects in a way that she hadn't been able to live it before, because not only was it hiding inside of her, but it was covered in these levels of shame, right? It was covered in these levels of internalized, not just the Judeo-Christian thing, but the personal shame. So anyway, let me just see if anybody has any questions or comments on that, if you can see how just this one story illustrates so much of this karmic axis.
If anyone has a question, you can just unmute yourself and speak.
Holy Moses.
I can't hear you.
Oh,
She said, Holy Moses.
Or Holy
Wendy.
Goddess. Holy Goddess. Screw the Moses.
Wendy, you can type your comment into the chat and I'll relay it. So any other comments or questions?
I just have a comment. It's really powerful, and just like you said, it's explained how the whole chart I can see in this regression. It's really powerful. Thank you.
Well, and you can also see the point that I was making before about how once we address all the complexes, and in our work it's layer by layer, but once we address all the complexes, her own energy naturally gravitated towards this North Node in a very powerful way, right? By recovering this other, what I would call a resource life, a life prior to when she was in her truth and her beauty and her sensuality.
Yeah, do you think it's
context.
I'm sorry. Do you think it's because the regression, like you kind of awaken her own energy from her soul that represent by the Leo 12th house, that it's kind of like her soul leading her to that memory?
Yeah, well, it's her evolutionary intention. You know, I mean, this is the thing that I see, and I mean, I've been doing regression for almost 20 years, and I'm still fascinated by every story because it is so, you can see so clearly how it can facilitate quite quickly the resolution of what has been the stumbling point, you know, what has been that samskara. I'm not saying that, you know, this completely heals the complex, but it dissolves a large part of that complex. There may be other stories attached to it that also need to be worked through layer by layer. But the release of pure, vital soul energy happens when we can reintegrate these lost parts of ourselves, these fragmented parts, these, in her case, dissociated, buried parts of the self, and bring them back. This is, again, back to Jung. We experience complex forms where we experience a defeat in life, where we're blocked and thwarted. And a part of our energy will dissociate and repress simultaneously in that instance when the trauma is met. And those parts do not reintegrate on their own. So you go on stumbling life through life through life, replaying those patterns, re-imprinting those traumas. And to me, it's kind of like doing it long form, right? When you can do it in the context of a 2-3 hour session. You know, thank God we have these modalities now that can help us do that. And you can kind of see in miniature right away in this one session how quickly her energy could unravel those complexes and go directly to the North Node.
Patricia, Wendy's asking, did you say the 12th house is related to dissociation?
Yes, trauma, fragmentation is the 11th. So the propensity of the soul to fragment is the 11th house, right? This is the Aquarius Uranus archetype, when it why we relate it to trauma in EA. So the propensity of the soul to fragment is there. It's a part of the structure of consciousness. And what happens to those fragmented parts? They dissociate. They are dissociated from the consciousness. This is the 12th house. So they either fly off into space somewhere, or go to the beach, or hang out in treetops, or hang out in the stars, and or simultaneously get buried within. But either way, they are walled off from the totality of consciousness. So they're kind of living their own lives, you know, dissociated from the consciousness.
Thanks, Patricia. I have a question.
Yes.
Is the father in that past life a current life relative or friend? And if so, is there value in confronting that person, or is it better just to work on oneself?
Well, it happens a lot in regression that we find. I mean, you know, if you're at this point in your evolution where we are, most of the people that are, I'd say all of you that are on the webinar, you know, have to be third stage individuated to first stage spiritual, somewhere in there. You know, if you're in that state of consciousness, you've been around the block a few times. And I would say, you know, again, if I'm going to give it a percentage, 90 to 95% of people you meet, you've known before, right? Because you're kind of in this evolutionary, like, oh, going around the block again. You know, you're an older soul, right? You've got more friends. So friends or enemies that you re-meet to work out these things. So in our work in regression, we do quite frequently, at some point in the spirit world, if they re-meet a soul like a father in a past life or a lover in a past life, they often recognize, oh wow, I know that's my father in this life, or that's my cousin in this life, or my ex-boyfriend, or whatever it is. Or sometimes we ask, and there's a value to knowing that, because it's just like if you were doing a chart reading for somebody who's asking you about, you know, what is my karma with this person? To unravel it in that way is to kind of release those bonds. And yes, doing your own personal work on your side of that karma is enough to release the karmic bond that might be between those two people. How that results and how the person carries it forward in their current life, meaning, you know, confronting of that person or whatever it is not always the case. Sometimes that is how they carry it forward into the current life. You know, most of the time it's them doing their own work.
Thanks. Thanks, Patricia.
Which also releases the other soul, by the way. You know, when you do your own work on these levels, when you finish a kind of karma with somebody, and somebody mentioned the EA article, which, you know, she had a story with her husband, her current life husband, that she was looking to work out because they had this kind of karmic complex between them where she felt overly responsible for him. Her working on that story, which was in the EA journal, you know, helped her release not only herself from that bond, but him from that bond, and accelerated the evolutionary process for both of them.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay.
We have a question from Sue. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Patricia.
Hi.
I noticed that you said that this woman had a reverse nodal return when you were working with her. Do you find that people have this sort of things happening when they have particularly powerful regressions?
Yeah, I mean, I always look at, I always
telling
look at the
transits.
transits. You know, I have the chart for every session and use it as a map, right? You know, I'm not interjecting so much when I'm listening to somebody and the concerns that they've come for. When I'm doing regression with somebody, you know, I'm listening to them and what they're bringing to the session, and I'm kind of looking at the chart, you know, smiling to myself, going, oh, of course. Because to me, it's like, oh, it's there in black and white. And yes, I look at the transits, and, you know, quite frequently there's an exact transit going on, be it a planet transiting Pluto or the nodes, or a nodal transit, like I mentioned. So the transits themselves release karma, or, you know, and that happens in the course of your life, where certain events will happen that will mirror or bring out those energies again, so that the soul can bring it to some kind of completion, some kind of healing. Or the approaching transit, especially with the outer planets, like say Saturn approaching Pluto or something, you know, is a slow burn. It's like people just get to the point where, I don't know what's happening to me. You know, I need to finally work on this. And that's when they, you know, call up somebody like us, right?
Right.
Great, thank you. Wanda, go ahead.
I just had a question kind of related to Wendy's question about the 12th house. Would that also apply to the Neptune placement and the Pisces?
Totally.
Placement? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Neptune square the nodes, Neptune conjunct, you know, any variety, South Node in the 12th house. any variety of that. I mean, in EA, some people find it confusing that we tend to use whole archetype, planet, house, and sign, and don't necessarily always differentiate in the way that you do in kind of classical astrology. But yes.
Great. We have another question from Sue. Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Well, you brought up the planets square the nodes, and you know, we talk about in EAA when planets are square the nodes, skip steps. However, the sun talks about the present life. So what do you think about when a person has the sun square the nodes? Is this setting up a skip step for future incarnations?
Well, I see the sun is a carrier of the Leo archetype by its rulership. And I know that Jeffrey has said that it doesn't imply a skip step. I'm not sure about that, because the way that I've seen it show up in past lives when the sun squares the nodes is, and that's in the case that I wrote in the EA journal, actually. She had Sun and Venus square the nodes. And both of them were very clear in her stories and in her current life situation and how it came from past lives. It's a consciousness that simply left themselves out of the equation. It's like, really, you know, your sun is like this sense of self, this Leonian sense of self. We say in EA it's an integrative point for all of the archetypes to come through in the current life. But when sun squares the nodes, there's a karma of kind of leaving oneself out of the equation. And then in relation to whatever the nodes are, either it's for family or it's for service or it's for, you know, whatever, career, but they left themselves out. And the recapturing of the sun and the sense of self is a karmic complex within itself. That's what I've seen it repeatedly in charts with that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Wei, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have another question just about trauma and the karma. So if somebody experienced the trauma in current life and he or she already forgive the people who did the harm to them, do you think they can resolve this trauma in this lifetime? Like the person who did the harm, can they kind of avoiding experience the same pattern in the next lifetime?
Well, we can see some of it in this woman's story as she was with the past life self, right? It's not that she was jumping to forgiveness, because we can say that jumping to forgiveness can be a bit of spiritual bypassing. I'm not saying it always is, but forgiveness is not the ultimate end when you're looking at complexes that have formed because of traumas. So in her case, she was kind of, she was compensating, ninth house, with her religion, right? She's this religious and she's going to be a nun and she's going to serve God and, you know, do all this higher work and totally stay away from her body and her anger and everything else that was unhealed in that life. So in her past life, she was already kind of skipping steps there, trying to jump to use spirituality as a panacea. I mean, there's not a blame or a judgment involved here. If you look at her life circumstances, she didn't have many options as that little girl, right? She's at home with an abusive father. Mother's useless. Mother's not helping her out. So, you know, she sees these nuns as a way out. But even to herself, she was not aware of that until they shaved her head and put the habit on, right? Then she was like, wait a minute, whoa, this is real, right? And some level of like, whoa, what am I really doing here came up for her. So, you know, this is the way the psyche that you had in a past life is the same psyche you have in the current life to a certain degree. So the things that she was unresolved with, you know, carry forward. The ways that we resolve trauma is not, forgiving somebody does not necessarily release the impulses in one's body. You have a right to be angry. You have a right to protect your space. you have a need, especially with Mars square the nodes, to restore one's healthy libidinal energy. And sometimes the way you get to that is through healthy anger. When one's boundaries have been invaded, you need to restore the healthy sense of boundary. So if she just was trying to jump to forgiveness, she would never get in touch with that layer, and a level of the complex would still be playing out as unfinished. That unexpressed anger would still come out. And as we know, right, you can't repress something, or you can repress it, but it only, the longer it's repressed, it only gets more and more distorted, right? And in her case, I don't know in her current life, but I would say in her case, repressed Saturn anger is going to come out as passive aggressive, 12th house. If it's not directly expressed, right? Or it can go to manipulation, right? Does
Yeah,
that
thank
answer
you.
your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Patricia, Wendy makes a comment, cultural conditioning, limited options, so it was best way for her to get closer to the 9th house.
Don't know if I understand the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Wendy, perhaps you could reframe that question. And we have a question from Lynn.
But you know, this brings up one thing I want to say, because I know sometimes when Pluto squares the nodes, you know, it's said in evolutionary astrology, this is a special condition where the soul has refused to evolve. And it isn't, like, to me, it's not a level of refusal as much as it's a level of, you know, the blocking was so severe that it's like, you know, the soul just doesn't see any resolution to the complex. It's like they lost the ability to feel that there's a resolution, so that the pattern then gets more and more entrenched. I mean, this story is, you know, touches upon some of that a little bit, although because she also has Mars square the nodes, you know, she didn't totally lose that will. That healthy will, you can see even from her story, carried her through some of that. It could have been a lot more tragic.
Yeah, Wendy says she totally agrees with you. We have a question now from Lynn. Lynn, could you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, Patricia, I was wondering, I'm trying to understand things about the polarity point of Pluto. And when you have Pluto square to the nodes like this person does, what's the implication with the polarity point? I mean, could you
Okay.
about
The
that?
polarity point is still active. So for her, there's this, and it's interesting, you know, her work and working with women, so, you know, there's an association with Aquarius, with memories of the, just archetypally, the astrological ages. There's an association with Aquarius of the matrifocal times, right? So the polarity point here in her current life is actualized, or more actualized, where she does these women's groups. Her service, 6th house, right, is part of this restoring what she is recovering in herself is given as a gift, right? That's a beautiful expression of the Leo Aquarius axis, right, which we're all in right now with the transiting nodes, right? What has she healed and individuated, and then it becomes her gift to others, her service. So in her case, yes, that polarity point is expressed in her life. When a planet is square the nodes, you simply stand on the planet and look to the node to the left. This is what we call the resolution node. So in her case, we have Taurus as the resolution node in the 9th house, which the universe would be saying to her, if I was just counseling her and she's questioning her truth, or because you see when she spoke her truth in the past and when she wrote about it, it was life or death, Scorpio, right? It ended up in her murder. So, of course, the soul can imprints, as you know, Lynn, right? Imprints these well, any of us who've done regression, we know we've all been through the persecution thing to a certain degree, right? Well, the soul kind of goes, well, why try that again? Like the last time I did that, well, you know, what's the point? Why would I even try to write that book or, you know, communicate these things that are precious to me? Because, you know, it's so subconscious that you're not even aware of it. They just avoid it. So if she was just coming to me in counseling and talking about, well, you know, I want to talk about these things, but I'm afraid of them, you know, I would be looking at this, right? Pluto squares this and says consistently, and in her work with women that she does now, she does a several step process. And one of them, the first step of the process is reintegrating with the truth of your body. Like, you can't get more literal than that, right? With the ecstatic truth of your body. So she's developing it, right? She's doing it. She's doing her evolution. This would be the node, be it North Node or South Node. Those archetypes are what need to be consistently developed, right? And yes, the polarity point still applies.
Thanks, Patricia. Any other questions or comments?
I'll take the chart down if we don't have any more questions on the chart and we want to just...
Okay, yes. We have about 15 minutes left.
Okay.
So we'll just go back to the attendee panel now. If you just click on stop share, that's it.
Okay, here we are.
Here we are, fantastic. I have a quick question. What advice can you give to people with nodes in Taurus and Scorpio?
What advice?
Well, is it always sexual, or is it always kind of violent or intense?
Well, it depends on which node is which. Your south if your south node's in Scorpio, yes. I mean, if your south node's in Taurus, maybe not so much, right? And which one are you talking about?
Right. Well, either actually. Well, that was interesting. Yeah.
I mean, if your south node's in Scorpio, I wrote about it in my book. I said those people come in, they're like the Pluto-Scorpio generation, or Pluto in the 8th house. They come in with a kind of Armageddon consciousness. It's like those souls have seen the worst of humanity. It's like the highest of the high and the lowest of the low. They've been through it, which is why they have such a no bullshit attitude. They're like, what, you think you can scare me? Bring it on, karma, bring it on, right? They've got that kind of attitude. That's distinctly different from somebody, again, if the nodes aren't squared, it's distinctly different from somebody with a Taurus south node, you know, who has more of an insular, shut down kind of complex, where they need to get more to the intensity. The Scorpio people need to find more of the Taurus polarity, which is about, you know, letting it be gentle, like her, reassociating with one's healthy sensuality, right? That passion isn't dangerous. That makes sense.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay.
Very helpful. Okay, any other questions or comments?
General karma questions, people?
I had a question as far as the transiting nodes. Will that bring up karmic complexes, especially if those nodes are squaring or conjuncting, you know, the fixed nodal axis?
Well, if you have a natal, it's what I said before, any transits to one's natal nodal axis is going to bring up something, right? And the nodal axis, or what I call the karmic axis, which is Pluto and the polarity point and the nodes combined. Those are two karmic axes in the chart, but combined I would call them the karmic axis. Any transits to that can bring up something. So the transiting nodes can bring up, you know, echoes of kind of karma associated most specifically with the houses that they happen within your chart. But if they're triggering your own nodal axis or your Pluto axis, your karmic axis, then yeah, they're going to bring up something there. And sometimes the flavor will be about what those transiting nodes are. So, I mean, with that woman's chart that I was showing, you know, I don't know what she's doing now. I'd have to call her and find out. I mean, I know some of what she's doing now, but to find out now that the transiting north node is going to be going over those points, I would assume that there's even a further kind of fruition that's going to happen in her expression of her creativity, etc. You know, but it can still, maybe it'll still bring up something from the sixth house, because the transiting south node would be in her sixth house in Aquarius, right? Maybe it'll bring up maybe some feelings of inadequacy or finding the right group or something like that, if that makes sense.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Please unmute yourself. We have 10 minutes left. Patricia, you once said to me that we could do our own kind of past life regression by putting our finger on a planet on the chart and then just seeing what comes up.
Well, I wouldn't say you can, that's the way I read charts, actually. When I do charts, I kind of just put my finger on the south node or Pluto in the south node and just close my eyes and kind of journey into the chart and start picking up the past lives. You know, you can guide yourself through your own past life memories, but, you know, it helps to have a structure. And you can generally, I often say, we can't guide ourselves through our own defenses. I mean, if it was that simple, people wouldn't need people like me, right? I mean, if we could rework all of our traumas without all those layers of repression and suppression and so on. So to a certain degree, there are certain things that are very deep core stories or very stuck traumatic places that are best to have a guide. But there's other stories. Not all of your past lives carry that deep, deep level of wounding where so many Band-Aids are laid over the boo-boo that's still not healed. You know, when you have that kind of wound, it's better to call in the EMTs, right? And the nurses that can take the bandages off and clean it out, you know. That's what we do in regression. But there's you know, your soul's had lots of experiences. They're not all so equally deeply, deeply wounding. They can carry a layer of wounding that sometimes just knowing the circumstances of the past life is enough to start to move the complex. Those kinds of stories you can access in what I call journeying style, you know, where you can kind of go into your own complexes and, you know, different people have different names for it, reading the Akashic records or whatever it is. And sometimes that can help loosen complexes, you know, if there's not big physical or emotional trauma attached to it. But again, you need a structure to do it, because you have to know how to bring something through to completion. It's helpful, rather, you know, than just remembering the story, if that makes sense.
Great. Thank you so much. Amy, go ahead with your question.
Okay. Hi, Patricia.
Hi.
I just thought of something. If when your South Node and Pluto are in the same house, in the 12th house, for instance, does that mean from a karmic perspective that there is like a double signature, like a core wounding that would come through that would, I'm not wording it right.
No, you're wording it exactly. If Pluto conjuncts the South Node, yes, there's a real propensity of the soul to get stuck in those archetypes, or has been a real propensity of the soul to just keep doing the same over and over and over. And it's gotten so deeply ingrained, it's like a big trench. You know, when I said that there's some scars like a skip in the record, that's like a freaking groove, you know, a deep groove in the record. When they're not conjunct and in the same sign, it carries a similar echo of that.
And it's something that the soul desperately wants to evolve through or work through in this life?
Yes, the polarity point to Pluto applies when it's in the same house or conjunct the South Node. It does not apply when it conjuncts the North Node. When Pluto conjuncts the North Node, it's like yes, elements of the past life of the South Node will come through, but the prescription in this lifetime is to continue running in the direction of the North Node. There is no polarity point to Pluto at that point, right? It's just keep going, keep going. Like you've already done some work on these issues and now really go with it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Great. Any more questions or comments? Yes, Lawrence, go ahead, please.
Hi there. I just read your book recently, and I just had a question concerning the orbs of planets that might be considered conjunct the South Node. I know in Jeffrey's book he talks about it using a up to 15-degree orb, but in your book you tend to not do that. I was just wondering, what would you consider to be a maximum orb for planets roughly around the South Node?
I've always stayed with 10 degrees. There are a few exceptions, though, that I've noticed. Like, I remember I had a guy with a Neptune square the nodes that was 11 to 12 degrees, in orb. And normally I wouldn't have considered that. But every regression the guy did, he was so dissociated. It's like, wow. I looked at him like, wow, that Neptune really does affect those nodes. So, I would say, and again, maybe the other, if I remember looking at his chart, the rest of the balance of the chart would point to a particular propensity to that, which is why that Neptune would be able to affect. But then again, it's Neptune too. Neptune just oozes all over the place. Not really good at boundaries. So I don't know if I'd expect Neptune to stay in a 10-degree orb. It's kind of the nature of the planet. Generally 10 degrees, but I have seen 11 to 12.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
So, Patricia, I heard that you gave a group past life regression at Costa Rica.
I did.
Could you tell us how that was, and maybe do you think we could do it on Zoom meetings one day?
I don't know about that. In Costa Rica was fantastic, but we had this great container, of a week together, right? So I actually did 2 exercises with the group at different times during the week. I did one with a reunification of the wounded inner child based on a moon lecture that I was giving. And that led up, kind of warmed everybody up to the past life work. And people had some really profound experiences. I mean, I don't often give a lot of credence in my work. I'm so into one-on-one work. I don't give a lot of credence to group regression. But, the more that I test it out and do it, I was quite impressed with the depth of what people got in touch with, and then the resolution. But I was guiding them specifically in that way, where we did do some Bardo work and we did have resources and complete some of the things that came up. It's not easy to do in a group, but anyway, it was great.
Great, thank you. We have about 2 minutes left. Any final questions or comments?
I just love listening to you, Patricia. The way you explain all of this and talk about it, it's awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. Thank you so much. Thank you from all of us. I'm going to unmute everybody now, and we can all say thank you. And see you again soon, Patricia. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Wonderful.
That was great. Loved it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you. Some of my familiar faces there.
Stop it.
Uh-oh. Fabulous lecture.
Okay, bye everyone. See you all again later. Bye.
Okay.
Bye.